to call us to order. It is time to go live.
Let's do.
Yeah, so friends, welcome. Stephen Feder here from United in Learning from the General Counsel Office, and it is once again a privilege and a delight to be able to welcome you for the second time in April. Isn't that weird? We are gathering twice this month because we didn't gather in March, working around Easter and Holy Week and all those exciting things. But we're back with another action-packed episode of the webinars for church treasurers, and I see that we've got 102 people with us tonight already, and I know we'll bump that up significantly before the next 10 minutes go by. So welcome. Glad to have you here, and thanks for joining us. Let me turn things over to Eric.
Okay, folks, good evening. And Stephen, I'll just mention, just in case, I didn't get the usual "we're being recorded" prompt, and that may just be me, but just in case.
I'm doing a recording through YouTube, so I don't have to upload it later.
Gotcha. Okay.
It's actually being live streamed to my United in Learning channel at YouTube rather than making a Zoom recording, and that's
There he
why you
goes.
didn't hear the thing. But it is being recorded, so everybody has to watch their language.
Okay, especially me. Okay, very good. Okay, folks, we have a bit of a pattern that we've adopted. We show the new creed each time and recall that we as finance people and treasurers are called to serve the church in a way that isn't always appreciated, but is much needed. And with that, I'd like to just take a moment for a land acknowledgement as well. Wherever we are sitting or standing right now, we are acknowledging that we are on land that has been inhabited by Indigenous people from the beginning, and that long before today, Indigenous peoples have been the stewards of this place for each of us across the country. We are grateful for the opportunity to meet, and we thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land. As settlers, this recognition of the contributions and historic importance of Indigenous people must be clearly and overtly connected to our collective conscience to make the promise of truth and reconciliation real in our communities. So, with that, tonight, we've got a fair bit of CRA stuff. There's a couple of things that we're not going to talk about very much at all. We can all say we're sick of the underutilized housing tax discussion, and literally either file or don't, but you've been warned. So that's where we'll land on that one. There is a fair bit of CRA stuff, and Clyde has been getting a fair number of T3010 questions that we thought we'd answer and share with you tonight. Angelica will have some, again, seasonal payroll information and updates on communication. And at the very end, well, just to note that for May, we're hoping to use the treasurer webinar slot for an expanded audience. We'll be inviting more treasurers who might not normally participate and other finance people to participate in a consultation around a study that the General Counsel is doing regarding minister compensation and sustainability, adequacy, all those kinds of things. And the task group will be looking for your input. So a bit more on that later on. So the 2024 budget and all this stuff, is all subject to the budget receiving royal assent and all those good things. But as I mentioned before, there's a couple of things that are now embedded in the Income Tax Act, or will be. So the place of issuance of the receipt, which presumably is town or province, which is a requirement right now, goes away. The name and address of the appraiser for gift in kind, it doesn't need to be included. A gift in kind receipt still will have the amount and what it is. And if the receipt's big enough, the CRA is more likely to come, audit and ask for this information, but they're not asking for it up front on the receipt. And then, of course, my favorite, I can now have tax receipts in the name of Eric Matheson as opposed to Eric H. Matheson. So there's, if that's the level of detail we're talking, folks. Okay. Another thing that's a little more that actually comes up more often is canceling a tax receipt. If you're having to issue a duplicate, or in the rare, if something misprinted, there's all kinds of reasons, but they updated the rules on how you can void a tax receipt. And they've also now made it official for all of you who've been receiving electronic tax receipts by email every time you make an online donation for the last 20 years. It's now permissible. So again, make of those what you will. This it might be a bit more concerning. There's a fair number of things, and I agree with them, frankly, giving the CRA more audit power, and this would apply to the Charities Directorate as well. And it's basically around anyone who's stonewalling or not providing their stuff. They're beefing up some fines. They've introduced a formal notice requirement. They don't have to publish it. They used to have to publish it in the official Gazette or something before they could revoke a charitable registration. Now they'll still do the normal thing, a 3 months notice, 6 months notice, but a little less bureaucracy. So the Charities Directorate, again, I'm not overly concerned about this, but we did not see much audit activity during COVID, and Clyde certainly has told us that there's more coming now. So all the more reason to have our act together. Okay, I'm going to be really quick on this. The deadline for filing, we've talked this to death. There's underutilized housing tax. We fall into this very technical requirement. Is it galling? Yes, it is. Don't shoot the messenger. Rose on the help desk has provided answers on a variety of interesting questions, but as of right now, the due date for filing for 2022 and 2023 is April 30th. Do it or don't. If you have a vacant manse and you complete sections 1, 2, 6, and 9 and claim an exemption. If it's occupied, you complete sections 1, 2, 5, and 9. Each trustee must complete it. I don't like this any more than anyone else that is having to do this. There's about 400 manses, and our official documentation says that there are to be between 3 and 15 trustees. So by my count, that's between 1,200 and 6,000 unnecessary forms. But there it is. Do it or don't. Andy referenced the bare trusts. Again, this would have potentially entailed some T3 reporting and setting up trusts, because we don't, most of our trusts, we have bequests and stuff with actual documentation. But a lot of the stuff we have in the church is from this 2-page addendum in the United Church of Canada Act. No one could imagine that the United Church should be caught up in this. But again, at least we have another year if we want to clarify our position further. But right now, we continue to take the view that charities are exempt by administrative dictate from the Charities Directorate. And I'm not considering this one a dead issue yet. Okay, I'm just saying that that's where we are now, and no action required. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Clyde for a bit to talk about his favorite form.
The favorite form that comes around every year, you mean? Never goes away. The first thing to mention is something Eric has already mentioned, and that's that you've got to make sure you're using the right form. It was unusual that they changed it on the last day of the year, but year ends of December 31st, which most of us have, is version 24. And so make sure you've got it. If you submit 23, it will not be accepted with your year end. If you do it online, there will be no concerns because it will automatically populate that form for you. So it's just one of the things to remember. If you're doing PDF or fillable form online, make sure you've got the right one. Going on to the next, just a few things in there. In the new form, you no longer need to report 10-year gifts. We've had the requirement there. There's a lot of places I'm not sure it was done properly, but that's now removed or will be. Well, it is removed, sorry, on the new form. Disbursement quota is a concern for some. You should not be worried about it because it doesn't fall into a concern until you've got probably in the area of $8 to $9 million in investment that you don't use for charitable purposes. Most of us are nowhere near that. So disbursement quota is a non-issue, although the calculations are needed. Donor advised funds, again, it's rare to have a fund where the donor still gives advice. And even if they do, that doesn't mean you have to follow it. The T1441, qualifying disbursements, grants to non-qualified donees. Grants in this case include bursaries and scholarships. My understanding of it. And so be aware, I'm trying to still find more information on that to be certain, but it doesn't hurt to put them there as long as you're recording them elsewhere where it's needed on the T3010. The Schedule 8, if you're filling it out online through My Business account, if you fill in the right boxes the right way, you will never see a Schedule 8 because it only puts up what you have to fill out. But if you do get one, use the amounts from the lines that where you report the amount that you have in investments and assets that are used with not for non-charitable purposes or not used for charity purposes. Again, simple calculation really, but it takes a few seconds to do the first time. And after that, we will be doing them, if it continues, we'll be doing them a lot quicker with less concern. One of the people that's on these webinars regularly, and unfortunately, I don't remember her name right handy, but she worked it out where you have to have investments, as I said, in the 8 to 9 million mark before you even think about worrying about whether you've got a concern.
And Clyde, if I may, if you have $8 million of investments, but you have annual charitable expense in the $500,000 or more range, you need to get up towards 20 million before it matters. So I'm actually thinking there's one or two congregations that would have to even worry while they're doing this calculation.
Okay, so that shows if it's one or two congregations out of all of Canada, it's not worth sweating over, folks. Moving on to the next one, the disbursement quota is still in. Property not used directly in charitable activities or administration. And this is something that I've had a lot of questions on recently. There's two ways to have property that's not used in charitable activities. One is your church building or another building if you happen to own a second one. And it is exclusively rented to one organization, or a part of your building is rented where they have sole use of that area. Then that is considered, as long as they're not a charity, that's considered property that's not used, and you'd have to prorate the value of your building down to that area. And in my own case, I've got an area like that, the Montessori school that's in our building, and I have to figure a prorated value for what they're using. It will not be significant dollars by any means. The other thing that you could have, we mentioned, is the investments. And if they are sitting there in a long-term position and you're using only the interest on them, then they're not used in charitable purposes. Only the interest is used. If you are drawing down from them, from the principal, then you probably would have even less than what your total is because you are using part of it. So it's one time to look at it over and over to make sure you've got it right, and then you don't have to worry about it after that. For the building itself, it does very clearly say to use the market value for unused land and or building. And market value is just one of the ways of valuing your building. We have insurance value and we have appraised value. And which one are you going to go with? Market value, to be honest, is never determined until somebody actually says, yes, I'll buy it for that value. So,
yeah, if I may, Clyde, the one of the challenges here is exactly what Clyde just said. Do we, or is there a possibility that we will now be required to occasionally procure and possibly even have to pay for a market valuation? It's kind of implied in the legislation, but it's early days. And right now, a guesstimate or, if you have a real estate agent in the congregation, a guesstimate will probably suffice, particularly because so few, if any, churches will ever actually have a disbursement quota problem. Sorry to interrupt.
Not a problem. The other thing with it is whichever value you happen to use, be consistent. They don't like seeing fluctuations that are greater than what they anticipate. So if you're consistent with it, and not necessarily the same number every year, but consistent in which one you're using, you'll be okay. There's a number of terms that are in the new form that leave us up to some concern as to exactly what they're meaning. And one of the ways to look up at these is to go to the Guide to Completing the T3010 publication, T4033. It is a significant number of pages. I believe it's in the area of about 60 pages. So I wouldn't recommend printing it unless you like nighttime reading where you're not using your computer. There are still things that don't show up in that guide, but there is a link there to go to a glossary where you can get every term that's used in the T3010, where it's one of the capitalized terms in there, and it will explain it for you. And one of the terms that's come up at least 4 times that I've seen in the last month is the impact investments. It's from line 4576. And this term is new. It's a new line. And impact investments in the glossary says that they're investments in companies or projects with the intention of having a measurable, positive, environmental, or social impact and generating positive financial return. So, how do you deal with that? Most of us, most charities do not invest in companies, but you might have some investment with companies and you might have them as part of your investment package. So I'm not sure how close they're going to be looking at that particular area, but it's just something that they're trying to do, like the United Church is doing with statistics. We're trying to get information so that we can see what our environmental impact or our social impact is. And we get a baseline to work from.
But folks, just to keep it simple, the United Church will report some impact investments because we have a manager that it focuses on sustainable development goals. Or we have a manager that invests entirely. So we could report those as impact investments. Some of you might have solar bonds. There's a variety of fixed income instruments that are invested in do good type stuff. Those would be impact investments. But frankly, this is an information field. It's not an accounting field. So the only limit should be this number should not be bigger than your total investments number.
Right.
And beyond that, you'll be okay.
Okay, and if we move on to the next area, this actually shows where the land and buildings that you have, the 4155, and the amount that you report in 4250 as being not used in charitable activities. If you leave 4250 blank, and there's one other place, I think it's a C17. I'm not sure of the line number at the moment, but if you do those two with blank or zeros and you don't input zeros, just blank, you will not be given a Schedule 8 to complete because you don't have funds or investments not used in charitable activities. So that's just a small tip for you. I think that's all we'll go in that area because we've already mentioned how to come out of the separating down your part of the land that may or may not be used in charitable purposes. Honorariums is a big topic right now. For years, we somewhat ignored them. More recently, T4As have been used, and we do mention this is the last point on the slip, but I'm going to start at that one. T4As for everyone that you're paying an honorarium to, and an honorarium is not a described term in the Income Tax Act. So the government looks at these as being almost employment income, but no deductions taken from it. Payment for services. And because of that, you report through the T4A, but you also need to include it in line 4880 on your expenses as part of the total remuneration, or total compensation is the term they use, that you pay out in the course of the year. And when you report it on Schedule 3, you will include that amount that's paid in line 380, with the number of persons that are involved in the total. If you've issued 5 receipts, you add 5 more people to line 370 as part-time or part year. So it is included in there, and that's what they're expecting to see. You could have, well, if you're using pulpit supply and you're using them fairly often, most of the people, you get paid twice and you're up over the 500 mark, so you're starting to issue T4As. But even under the 500, you're including them in here, and you could have 20 or 30 people listed as having been paid that. So it does need to be reported. Okay, just a few comments on mistakes that are made in filing the T3010. Missing the deadline. There are too many that miss the deadline. Over the years, it has caused Eric headaches because if they miss it by very much, they get revoked, and then he gets involved in trying to get them back in a charitable status. That's not going to last much longer for Eric. So try and get your files in on time.
We will have backup, folks.
The T1235, that's the one where you list all your officers and directors. In our case, the board or council members, trustees, and they all need to be listed there, but do not put an end date to their service if they're continuing into the new year. If you don't change them until March, don't put a March date down as the termination unless they're actually finished in that role. Because what we were running into was churches that had submitted 15 names, but they had nobody that could contact charitable directorate because they had all been terminated at year end. So it's important that you don't put that on until they actually leave that role. The T1236 reporting gifts that are not qualified yet do not include the not qualified donees on the T1236. Only those with charitable status. Anybody who you've given a gift to that's not on the T1236, you now use the T1441 because they're not a qualified donee. And so you will have some. You may only have one or two, but you still need to report them.
And folks,
and even if the church, sorry.
So, Clyde, just to qualify, most people shouldn't be, in my opinion, filling in a T1441 unless they can demonstrate that program meets their direction and control requirements and so on. So hopefully there are very few out there where people are experimenting with this. But if they are, just be aware of the rules and that there's an extra layer of diligence there if it's a non-qualified donee.
Yep. And then we go on to the church in the process of closing. Too often that process goes over a year end. And so on the T3010, you fill out and say that, yes, we're closed or closing. And immediately the CRA looks at this and says, here's extra forms that are needed. What's happened to all your assets? And they can basically level a penalty to you for the same value as your assets. And it's not worth it. You're better off to make sure your assets are all down to zero before you let the CRA know that you're closed. Much easier if you're merging or amalgamating because you can get the CRA to combine the two numbers into the one that you're going to continue to use. But if you're closing, you've got to watch the timing on it. And the T12 2020, for 2023, we have to be sure to report the disbursement quota if it's required. And I recommend highly that you use the online version of completing the form, because as I say, it will only give you a Schedule 8 if you need to file it. I'm going to back up to the T1235 to a question I had just today. I know Marianne's online because I saw her earlier on here. When you're listing all of your board members or trustees or council people, it doesn't matter what their role on the council or board is. If you're listing them all, include everyone. If you've got an executive of your board or council, where you might have 4 or 5 people out of a 25-member board who are like an executive, you can get away with just issuing it or just including the executive. But it's much better if you include everyone and include everything, because if there's two people from the same family, husband and wife team, which happens a lot in our churches, both of them are disqualified from the number of people that are active on your board as far as the CRA is concerned. And you've got to watch that we have enough people diversified in family relations so that you're not considered a family foundation. And not United Church, but I had one that got switched to a family foundation 2 years ago because everybody was related.
And folks, Steve, you can let us know if there are other questions, but I thought I'd mention one. I probably should have even done a slide, but I bumped into this for the first time this year where the CRA, I mean, I would bet most people on this call have at some point had to send copies of their tax receipts into the CRA, their personal tax receipts. I seem to get asked every third year or so. And we had a trustee who was also a large donor. The CRA was asking for further proof because that particular individual happened to be the signer of the tax receipts. And tax receipt fraud is a big deal. It's a big thing. It's common. And that's one of the reasons but anyway, they were asking for actual copies of the donation envelopes or printouts and stuff. So really important to retain those donation envelopes because there is tighter scrutiny. This is an area that is still relatively high trust. And frankly, frauds happen every year with tax receipts. So if you're the signer of the tax receipt, there's a greater chance that you might have to prove your donations. And I mentioned that just to prompt more questions. Steve, anything out there?
Yeah, I got a bunch of them, and a lot of them are kind of technical. But let's back all the way up to the disbursement quota and the question of exclusive use space in the church. David is asking, does exclusive use space have to be locked off from other areas?
I don't know that it's all been defined, but let's see if Clyde, it's always good to see if Clyde and I have the same answer. We don't always. I would say that if it's dedicated space that, your church volunteers don't have a key to or shouldn't have a key to, then that's dedicated space.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, probably depends on what your lease set with that agency says too. If the lease grants them exclusive use space, I guess it would be.
Yeah.
Thank you. Questions around the property value and how you assess that. And Andy Spears is talking about the impact assessment. Is that just Ontario or is that across the country? Anyway, he's wondering whether we could use the impact assessment as a marker for market value.
Andy's an aggressive businessman. He could try, I suppose. But speaking as someone who just looked at his impact for cottage purposes, the current values, I think, are still 2016, unless you've been updated. For this year, I'm going to say you use the best number you can come up with, and maybe you've, I don't know. We've been suggesting for years that people put market value on their report because most church buildings aren't even on a financial statement, right?
Right.
So I would say this year, it being new, best efforts, best guess, real estate agent. And in the future, I really fear that we might have to get into the thing that businesses do around getting periodic or valuations for market value purposes. I hope that's not the case. I don't want us to get all twisted about that quite yet. But for this year, I would say impact. I mean, go ahead. It's a number. It's not a very defensible number, but for this year, sure, give it a shot. And I do think many provinces have a provincial authority that's increasingly doing market value.
I just wanted to make sure that we weren't using an acronym that people from outside Ontario didn't understand.
Yeah.
So, thank you. So Kathy is asking about the underutilized housing tax. She has filled out the 2022 form, but she's got a number of trustees on vacation, hasn't done the 2023 one yet. What happens if she doesn't do it because the trustees are away?
Again, best efforts at this stage. I would do them when you get a chance. There's two choices, actually. Don't do them at all, or submit them a little late. And I frankly think there's more risk in submitting them late than there is in not doing it. The government, the CRA has already changed the form. So we've been anticipating a retroactive exclusion for the 2023 filing. So if you are hearing me talk out of both sides of my mouth, it's because I just did. You could do it. There's a risk that sending something in late triggers a penalty. But at least submit the 2022. That's the most definitive statement I'll give you.
Thank you. And a follow-up question on the similar topic, the underutilized housing tax. Paul's trying to wrap his brain around this.
It won't work.
Mance is occupied for 365 days of the year. Surely it isn't underutilized. So can't we just prove that and not submit the forms?
You would claim that on your form.
That's what the form is for.
The technicality is that it isn't owned by a charity and it isn't owned by a Canadian citizen. It's owned by a trust. That's the technicality. It's crap, but it is what it is.
Thank you. Coffee has arrived in my house. I recommend that. Impact investment. Glenn is asking about this. He says we have shares in Oiko Credit, but we donate the returns, about 2 and 3%. Is that what the sort of thing that an impact investment would be about?
Technically,
I would say yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Honorariums. You were talking. I've got a couple of questions here. Best practices for payments to ministers, musicians, and others for weddings and funerals. What do you recommend these days? It used to be that the funeral director would come up with a series of envelopes and just hand them around.
Okay.
The best practice, according to the United Church Handbook for church treasurers, is that the funeral home should be paying the church all of that, and it's put into payroll. Because you're doing the function in the payroll, in the place of your employment.
Oh.
If they're doing it outside of the place of employment, then that's up to another arrangement. That's nothing that we would have to deal with.
Yeah, that's a bit gray, but the whole notion is it's certainly job related if it's in the building. It's probably job related if it's a local funeral home too.
Certainly if it's a parishioner.
Yes.
Yep.
I mean, I think there are a lot of ministers who do community funerals for the local funeral home for people who have no relationship to the congregation.
Yeah, and these
are the issue of parishioners and weddings. You don't have a funeral home as an arbiter in the middle. And so we've had people who just want to get paid cash. We've had people who want us to jam it through the payroll. And it seems unclear what the preferred approach is. And then if there's deductions on when it pump up through the payroll. It's
job related income. Certainly if it's done on your site, everybody would like a cash deal, right? But we can't be, as a charity, we can't be doing cash deals and barter, at least not on the internet. So
another question about issuing T4As. When you've got a scholarship bursary you're giving to a student or something, you have to issue a T4A along with that?
T4A in box 105. I was just looking it up before we came online tonight.
There you go. On my business account, says Roberto, the term owner is listed and it can't be updated. Is that the same as director? What do we do about that?
I think, well, Clyde, my short answer would have been yes.
I think it's the same as director or the same as a trustee or chair of your board, whoever, but it's one name that's related to the church.
Mm-hmm. And it's at setup, it's the primary account. It's the person who provided their own social insurance number and their own tax information.
Guys, I've been down this route with the CRA. It's a different classification. We have listed as owners a bunch of people who were direct members of council 20 years ago, and I have tried to get them removed, and they require that I submit a request to change the owners, and it has nothing to do with officers and directors, according to, and maybe I should phone back 5 more times, but it's a really funky, bizarre part of that form that I tripped over trying to get fixed.
Okay. Well, you can also check with Rose because she's done a lot of this. And again, if they have names on record that haven't been changed, which sounds to be like your case, Andy, then you're basically toast. Then you need to get into this formal update request.
Yeah, because they don't pull it. I assume they would pull it off of whatever the
Oh
team.
no,
So they don't. They just said, no, you have to separately request it, even though you submit your officers and things every year to us.
That's right.
Yeah, the thing with it is that my business account comes under the taxation side of CRA, not the charity side. And the two of them don't share information very often. And that's one of the reasons we don't use social insurance numbers as a way of identifying them on the T1235. We have to use birth dates because that information cannot be shared across there.
So Barb is asking then, how I have the same issue. She says, I can't update the CRA information. They won't talk to me.
That's not uncommon. And for tonight, just to say, we have on this deck and elsewhere, the CRA helps. And Rose can give you best advice on your specific situation.
Yeah.
Follow up to the T4A questions. Paul just asked about pulpit supply. Can you remind us of the policy around issuing T4A slips for people who do pulpit supply and summer fill-in and that kind of stuff?
Anyone that is paid an honorarium, which is what pulpit supply has been referred to many times, it's the same thing. If they go over a total of $500 in a year, in other words, they provide pulpit supply for probably only 2 times, then they will have to have a T4A at the end of the year.
Mm-hmm.
For that reason, in my own practice, what I do is if a minister is being called to do pulpit supply, or anybody's coming in to do pulpit supply, I require the first name or the full name, the full address, and their social insurance number up front.
Yeah,
if they only do it once, we don't worry about it. If they do it twice, I'll use it.
Yeah, we got caught by that in my church too. We got to the end of the year, somebody had been there twice, and we didn't have that information, and we were scrambling. It was not fun.
Yeah.
And if I may, folks, some ministers, I've dealt with this just today, take umbrage at the tax software where they're running a business, like, their own business by generating pulpit supply revenues. Mm-hmm. But that's just the way the forms are set up. There ain't anything we can do about that. That when you receive money from another entity for services rendered, you're notionally self-employed. Mm-hmm. From a CRA definition perspective.
And they can use the T4A to when they're reporting their self-employment income.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. That's part of it. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Steve.
Just a couple more and then we'll carry on.
Okay.
So Reinhard is talking about UCW and AOTS income and expenses. They get reported by the charge because these aren't separate charitable entities, correct?
Those entities, it depends. You either, if there's any tax receipting involved by those organizations, like if a donation to the UCW, my own church, UCW wound up a little while ago, but before that, I would donate to their various funds and get a tax receipt. That absolutely had to be reported on, consolidated on a T3010. Same with AOTS. If they're entirely separate and there's no tax receipting and they consider themselves entirely separate, that's a different, that's a decision everyone can make locally.
Okay, thank you. Last question here from Jane on the T1236. Your online example says that for payments to the United Church Mission and Service, we should answer no to being associated. But aren't we associated if we're subordinate to the United Church?
And the answer to that is, grammatically or phonetically or whatever the word is, yes. But associated charity is a technical term, which means that Charities have filed certain paperwork with the CRA to get certain accounting treatments, and we are not an associated charity. A local church is an internal division of the national corporation, but ironically not an associated charity.
Well, and we each have separate charitable status numbers, right?
Yeah. It's like pastoral oversight. In the United Church, it's a good thing. In most places where I live, it's a bad thing.
I'm not going there, but I will say that's the end of the questions.
Okay. Well, next up, you're being saved from me for a while today. Angelica, I hope you're there and ready for the next slide, which I'm pulling up right now.
Yes, I'm here. So this is actually an easy few slides, not as complex as CRA. Just a couple of reminders with regards to ADP. So you will probably be receiving an email with regards to your annual schedule for June 2024 to 2025. So please take your time to review the schedule and contact ADP directly if there's any changes, specifically if they fall on the stat holidays. Please kindly review. And if you're having challenges getting through ADP, Payroll is always there to assist you. So the next couple of slides, Eric, are just samples of the email that you're going to receive by ADP. And then the next slide would be the schedule that you're going to be receiving from ADP. So please ensure that you check this, that it's correct. And if it's not correct, if you want some changes, you must contact ADP directly. If it all fails, please connect with us. Next slide. So unfortunately, the annual increase, the service fee is 2.9 as stated before. So that is going to also be, you're also going to be receiving a letter by the end of May or first week in June. Next slide. Authorized contacts, incredibly important. Key information, a backup is important. Kindly complete the forms necessary, whether you're adding one, whether you're changing one, whether you need a new one. And if you're having some challenges, please connect with our team at UCC. A couple of employment pieces, but for Ontario only. Please refer to your province of ESA if need. But a couple of important factors in posting positions. You must now disclose the salary range in your job posting. So if you're recruiting someone, an admin assistant, for example, you must indicate the range of the position, what is the minimum and what is the maximum. And all of the postings are now required to be kept for 3 years. So this wasn't in place before. You can actually get rid of all of the postings, but now you have to keep them for 3 years. You can no longer ask for Canadian experience. It's a no-no. In terms of vacation pay, you must write on your letter, offer letter, and agree with the candidate that whether you're going to pay the vacation on every pay period. And that's generally falls for hourly employees who are maybe only part-time or a few hours during the week. Disclose of AI. So that probably doesn't apply to most of the churches, but it does apply to us, the UCC, because we will be using AI for screening some of our candidates, but we have to now be able to, we have to disclose that we are using a system for recruitment.
Angelica, I have to say, I thought that said ow.
No, AI.
Yes, I know.
Artificial a couple of things on leaves that we've had questions from pastoral charges. It's about sick leave. After 2 weeks of employment, an employee is eligible for 3 unpaid sick days. It's job protected. You must allow your lay employees, of course, to take their time if they need to. A medical note will not be required soon. That's still up in discussions, but it appears that we're no longer going to require a note to be provided for someone who wants to take time off for the 3 days. If they are sick for more than 3 days, then it's at your discretion to us.
Angelica, I'm getting a question, and I wondered that too. Are these Ontario regulations or national
Ontario.
regulations?
Ontario.
This is
Ontario.
Ontario.
Ontario, yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, and if I can, folks, we've listed Ontario here, general council obviously based in Ontario, but about 40% of our congregations touch Ontario in about 6 or 7 regions. So, but do check with your local Employment Standards Act as well.
Absolutely. Vacation time, the minimum, please note, is 2 weeks, is no longer 1 week. And about 5 years is 3 weeks. And the vacation pay, same, 4% for 2 weeks and 6% for 3 weeks. That's the minimum. The minimum wage rate increase in Ontario, again in October, comes into effect, $17.20. General, but for students is $16.20. And I've put actually the minimum wage by province on that link below there. Next slide. Very important, your mandatory training, it's regulated, and you must at all times provide this training to any new employee, either before they start with you or on the first day that they start with you. And some of these are actually free of charge if we look into the websites. And if you need some, you can just email me and I can provide them for you.
Angelica, a quick question before others ask. There used to be a small employer exemption, like under 5 or something, for this kind of stuff. Do these points apply to every charge, even if they have 1 or 2 employees?
You're correct. Correct. Some of them apply to 50 and over. Some are 25 and over.
Okay. But again, it's good practice, for a small employer to be aware of and frankly follow this stuff anyway. But
specifically women's, because for our lay staff who are working in maintenance, it's quite important that they are provided with not only the women's but the health and safety. Equally important.
And once again, Angelica, I'm getting questions about, this is presumably an Ontario regulation.
Ontario.
How do people find out about their own local provincial regulations?
That's right. So you can.
How do they find out about that? Where should they go to find out what the rules are in BC?
You can Google it, and if you want, I can find it for you. You can Google your province and say the Employment Standards Act for Alberta, and it will come up. Employment Standards Act for BC, and it'll come up.
Yeah, and every province, we're mentioning this because it's all new, but every province will have a web page with the summary requirements and anything new.
That's right.
Are there people in the regional council office that might be good to consult about these things?
They may be able to provide you with some information. They generally call me, but yes.
Yeah, I think the regional folks, and I'm not dismissing this in any way, the United Church is very well versed in minister standards and rules and processes and so on. For lay employees, we tend to rely on local knowledge of provincial requirements.
And that's about it. That was quick and fast for me.
Okay, so I got a few questions for you, Angelica. You didn't think you were going to get away easy, right? A couple of people have not had an email from ADP about the next payroll schedule. What should they do?
It should be coming soon in the next week or so. If you don't receive it, just connect with us and we'll follow up.
Thanks. Maggie says that she's got some authorized users at TeamPay, but Evelyn Valida, your office, doesn't know who they are. How do you make sure the two systems talk to each other, or what do they need to do?
Well, ADP is a holder of all of the contact information, and we actually get the information from them. And they generally provide us with a report either every 3 months or quarterly whenever we ask for one, when we know that the two are not. We always rely on ADP maintaining that up-to-date information.
So if somebody's trying to talk to Evelyn and that person isn't on Evelyn's list, what would they do?
Well, contact us. We have the ability to connect with ADP also to check our records.
Great, thank you. Vacation sick leave issues. Does this apply to organists or part-time administrators?
So that depends on the employment, the offer of employment that you've negotiated with that employee. I would have to look at it. Each case is different, depends on what your policies is with it, with regards to vacation.
All the training regulations here that you were listing, do those apply to summer co-op students?
Yes, specifically the health and safety one, mandatory.
Laura says workman's WSIB requires staff to have first aid, but if you're not paying into WSIB, do you still need to do that?
If you're not paying into WSIB, no, you don't.
What about older employees? You were talking about how this is required for new people. What about folks who've been around for a while?
Generally, these trainings are supposed to happen every year as a reminder for all staff.
And again, folks, we do have the small employer, like just check that out and make sure what applies. But workplace health and safety should be I mean, it may feel bureaucratic sometimes, but every time I've done it, there's been a reminder of something that I'd forgotten.
Carol says, surely this isn't the responsibility of the treasurer. Surely M&P ought to be looking after this stuff, not treasurers. Treasurers have too much to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'll answer that one. The treasurer might end up being the measure, like M&P, yes, should be monitoring these things and should be receiving any updates, the connects newsletters from our HR folks and all that. But treasurers are often the messenger just because you heard about it from a compliance perspective.
Thank you. We're hiring a new administrator for 3 hours a week. Do we have to put them through all that training?
It's mandatory. You should. Good practice is that you should provide that employee with training, especially health and safety, harassment. I mean, again, it depends on the number of employees you have in the church, but it's a good practice for mandatory training to happen with all new employees.
Thank you. Do we need to inform ADP when an employee has been there for more than 5 years and they're entitled to more vacation pay?
No, you would have to do that on team pay. You would change that. You don't inform ADP, you do it yourself.
You do it yourself on team pay. Good. Those are the questions I've got related to payroll. Thank you.
Okay, folks, you're stuck with me for a little while now. And we'll be doing a full-blown webinar. I've had requests from a number of regional councils on changes in charitable status, closure, amalgamation, step-by-step best practices to avoid getting caught up in any kind of bureaucratic hassle once you've already closed. And this, Clyde mentioned before, revocation tax and whether charitable assets were properly disposed of. It's a real pig to deal with after the fact. And we'll be dealing with that in a full-blown webinar that's customized for an audience. Most of you hopefully don't need to know that, but you'll know that it exists. But anyway, just a few words about your charitable status. There's basically two ways to have charitable status. It's either at the individual church level, where you have your RR number, you issue your tax receipts, or in multi-point situations, it can be held at the pastoral charge level. The ironic part is, if it's at the pastoral charge level, where you're consolidating your reporting, the CRA may not even know how many churches are under there. A pastoral charge historically has been a unit of ministry. However many churches presided over by one minister. I'm probably exaggerating that to make my point. So it makes for an interesting dialogue, and you'll recall we bumped into some of this with the queues and the various COVID-related activities where the United Church was a square peg in the round holes of how all other charities are organized. The United Churches are quite unique in having their own charitable number, yet being internal divisions and not being incorporated. So, again, just in case there's any newbies out there, you aren't, you aren't a charity just because you're a church. You have to keep that T3010 going, and you can't be messing around too much on. You need to be quite diligent on issuing receipts, in particular, but adherence to charity rules, and that's why we talk about all this stuff. Again, you'll have your one single point charge. Your payroll number, your charitable number will be the same, and you'll have an RP for payroll. You'll have an RT for your HST claim, and an RR for your charitable number on your tax receipts. There's a whole bunch of changes that do not, like the outside world doesn't care what a pastoral charge is. Like, if you're St. Andrew's United Church in small town New Brunswick, that's what everybody knows you as. They don't know you. You might have some cute pastoral charge name, but it really matters what's on your tax receipt and how the community knows you. So sometimes there are changes where you have to let Susan Jackson know, and the statistics people, and there might even be a reassignment of an M&S number, but nothing is required outside. This will be heresy for a church employee, but I care way less about the inside stuff. Like, there's only so much trouble you can get into if that's screwed up, but the outside world can inflict a lot of pain on treasurers and everyone else if you get outside of the compliance requirements. So determining where charitable status is held is really important. And again, this is a multi-point. If the pastoral charge is the charity, generally there could be anywhere between 2 and I think the current record is 6 points underneath there that are periodically served by a minister. If you add one under there, no one knows. The numbers are consolidated. The one thing to be careful about is that the pastoral charge name should be on the tax receipts as the charity name. And you might have also known as St. Andrew's United Church or something. Okay? That's where the pastoral charge has charitable status. In a single point situation, the pastoral charge is, and we bumped into this a lot with Q's, is an administrative construct, and maybe it administers the payroll and it shares certain expenses, the minister in particular, but in some respects, the outside world doesn't know that it exists because the primary filing is the charitable filing from each of the churches underneath. And we bumped into this again, problems because our pastoral charge will often have a number that isn't the same as the GST, HST, or charitable number, because we dutifully tried to set up the pastoral charge where we're sharing information. So internal, like pastoral charge reorganizations where the charities are separate, typically that won't require CRA notification. You're just adding some names to moving things around, and yet in other times you need to be aware, and in virtually all amalgamations you need CRA notification. So I'm just offering. I was mentioning before the session formally started, I have a deal with the CRA to speed up amalgamation processing, where we'll actually process a name change first so that the newly named charity can get going and operating, because it'll take 6 to 9 months to process an amalgamation. A name change can be done authorized nationally with a fax, and yes, a fax, where we nationally confirm that the church is in good status, is subject to our governance protocols, which is, of course, the United Church of Canada Act and the manual. And then it basically, as soon as the name change goes through, which typically takes 2 to 4 weeks, folks can get going with the new operation and change over the bank account name, the ADP name, the CRA payroll account name, and so on. So a letter of good standing they go out under my name. I don't provide any of them, but they go out under my name every week, and they go out for all kinds of situations. They basically confirm that your congregation is an internal division, but not an associated charity of the United Church of Canada, subject to the Act, and that local trustees are authorized to, buy, sell, do different things. What we're finding is that, again, we don't fit into the normal expectations of banks, investment firms, government granting bodies. We're finding that we have to provide this letter of good standing for all kinds of situations. Many of you will have asked for one when you're applying for a grant, or your bank will insist on one. Or I've got one right now where a credit union is refusing to have a congregation buy a car. I'm not sure if it's for a refugee family or what, but to buy a car because they're not incorporated and they're insisting on corporation papers. And typically, by providing this letter and the legal references, and then kicking it up the food chain from the frontline worker, we typically do get it approved. But it's a convoluted explanation because the United Church, of the 86,000 charities in Canada, we're about 22 or 300 of those. We're the only ones that are unincorporated internal divisions with separate numbers. Weird as it can be. So, any questions on that? I've just thrown that in because of the time of year and the CRA discussion generally.
Sure. So let me pick up Jennifer's question right away. Who does she send that request to? She's asked for one and hasn't come yet.
If she's asked for one, it depends who she asked, but if she were to ask me, I just forward them on to people. We're actually going to set up a help desk because I am going to be retiring, but we should have a standard intake for this. The turnaround time is typically a day or two. Mary Worrell does an outstanding job of these and has a complete inventory. So send it to me. Some regions have tried to step in and very occasionally they're recognized by the national office, but they're often not. So that's why we've been doing it nationally.
So a couple of these odd payroll questions then. Kelly says, does anything need to be reported differently when the pastoral charge has the payroll number and handles the payroll, but all three of the communities of faith have their own charity number?
Well, this is where this is almost a statistics question because the filing for the payroll will be under the RP number. And then what do you report on the individual, like if there's one employee being shared by three, it doesn't make sense to have three reporting compensation. I don't know if Susan Jackson's on this call and comment on the statistics, or I may have to get you a more detailed response.
I can tell you how we've handled it, and that is for some, if there's 3 points in the pastoral charge, then each one reports under compensation the amount that they pay into the pastoral charge.
Mm.
So it's a part-time employee, one part-time employee.
Thank you. Tricia asks, is there a deadline each year by which charitable receipts must be issued?
Yes, February 28th. And my congregation would say January 28th. But at the end of February, Clyde, were you going to say something different?
Yes, I will say something different because there is no official deadline for them. And in fact, there is nothing in the Act that says we must issue them. We issue charitable donations receipts because it encourages further givings.
So Clyde is correct in being technical, but my answer is with all the other stuff that's due for February 28th, including payroll filings and so on, I think the general expectation of our customers or our members is the same. And I wasn't kidding. My folks like to get them in January.
I try to have them issued in the second week of January.
Mm-hmm.
And I think ours wait until we've had the books overseen by the accountant, but always by mid-February. Ken says, our pastoral charge does not have charitable status, but administers payroll. Do all of the community of faith report that they've issued a T4 or a RL1 for Quebec?
The pastoral charge, if they administer payroll, they must be doing it under the numbers of one of the churches.
No, that's, I'm going to jump in there. A lot of folks went out and got separate payroll numbers because they didn't want one of the individual churches. Quite a number of people use one church as a clearinghouse, and it's all reported under one church's number. But a lot of others have a separate RP number that's completely different and distinct from any of the underlying churches. And in that situation, the RP filing is from the pastoral charge, not, and the underlying churches aren't, I don't believe, doing that kind of payroll filing.
Thank you. I have a question that goes all the way back to the beginning of our evening, and that is, if mileage is paid to a pulpit supply person, is that included on the T4A?
Yes. Everything that you pay is recorded.
Good. Those are the questions. Thank you.
Okay. So switching gears a little bit, and I'll be fairly quick here because not everyone is a participant in the UCC Protect Direct plan, but there's a lot of work happening in this space that applies whether you are or not. So we've been doing a lot of work on the question of what is adequate insurance, which in the case of your house, for example, and contents, most of you would be, the underlying assumption generally is that you want to replace that stuff if it's lost. So you insure the full replacement value. In our setting, we have a lot of buildings that we almost certainly wouldn't build back to the same size and scale. And there's a variety of other questions. So the replacement cost has been the standard for decades, but is now being revisited both from a practical perspective and a cost perspective. So expect more guidelines on that, and the United UCC Protect Direct program is going to be offering some specific choices. The key point being, if we need to make sure that your regional council is on side with what the local definition is of adequate insurance, and you really want to make sure that your congregation is aware. So there needs to be good disclosure on this. A treasurer should never be making these decisions by themselves, and even a finance committee, like the board, always make sure that if you're making it a trade-off decision that involves risk, always make sure that the board owns it. As a treasurer, you're just a messenger and a compiler and stuff. But there should never be a time where you say, hey, the treasurer decided it, and all of a sudden it goes offside for some reason. Generally, we want to insure anything that not having the insurance would get our volunteers into trouble personally, or in the extreme, put the church out of business. But these days, we've also had to balance that against affordability. So, adequate insurance should for sure include, you shouldn't join a volunteer board anywhere in Canada without asking if they have directors and officers liability coverage. And all our congregations do. Our outreach ministries have to apply for it separately, but we actually check to make sure they do too. You should have liability coverage even if you don't have a building. If you're meeting in someone's home, at least theoretically, you should have liability coverage in case your group somehow gets accused of something. Property insurance, again, you need to have property insurance that makes financial sense in your context. And it needs to protect against a full replacement or whatever it is you might rebuild, while covering smaller claims too. I am taking the view that abuse coverage should be mandatory. That's my personal opinion. That's not an absolute statement. And even if it were, nothing in the other church is absolutely enforceable anyway. But whether it's abuse of vulnerable populations, that could include youth, but that could also include seniors. So I personally take the view that every congregation, board, and so on should have abuse coverage. And if you're with a local Farmers Mutual or something, and if that's a real company, I'm just using the general term, often you won't have abuse coverage. And we include it in the standard, and it's actually a fairly premium type offering. We include the abuse coverage in the United Church Direct program. A number of other insurers, you have to apply for it separately. Cyber insurance is a good thing to have these days, but a lot of you aren't yet there, don't have the systems in place like multi-factor authentication and so on to qualify, but we can help folks get it if they need it. Someone mentioned workman's comp. This is a repeat slide, but in provinces where it's not mandatory, most people opt out because they'd love to cover the sexton or the custodian who does actual physical things. And I know that ministers also do physical things, but the general rule, because we have the restorative care program, most people opt out, but that does mean that you aren't covering some of those short, smaller contract part-timers. And some congregations opt to have workman's comp, even if it's optional, because they want everyone to be covered. And again, volunteers aren't workmen in this context anyway. Lots of congregations add a layer of comprehensive general liability above what's typically called the $2 million minimum. Again, in Toronto, I recommend it highly. There's probably 20 lawyers that live within 200 yards of my house, and so we're just a more litigious world. But again, we'll talk a little bit about other ways to save money, including the deductibles or potentially moving off of full replacement value. So we have launched a cyber response, which is a call center help function. It's not insurance, but it's available to all congregations, whether they're a part of the UCC Protect plan or not. The third-party insurance has been really well received. We're adding local contacts for BC and Quebec in the next couple of weeks. And for the next renewal, we'll have a few formal options to move off of replacement value, full replacement value for a stated amount. The tricky part is most claims aren't full loss. So if you cut your total insured value amount in half, the premium saving will be 10%. It won't be 50%. And a couple of other things we're doing. I was dealing with someone yesterday or today who was just obviously had some folks locally keen to know that a new piano had been added to the coverage. Well, anything 100 right now, anything 100,000 or below is an automatic add. So as soon as you request it, you can consider it added. And I'm trying to have that raised to 250,000 for the coming renewal. Similarly with deleting, they used to ask for lots of proof and deeds and sale documents and stuff. If we have a written request with a name and date from an authorized individual, the person we deal with on insurance, that's going to be good enough. So there'll also be, again, we're rather than talk about something that some of you might not be participating in, and right now about half of all congregations do, there'll be a customer webinar this spring on all aspects of the coverage, the service level agreements. And again, you've heard me say repeatedly, the service in our first year was just atrocious, frankly. We'll have some news on discount appraisal options, and a new streamlined renewal process, which is aimed at giving you all the information you need up front and getting you your insurance documents well ahead of renewal. again, all of these things are things that did not happen in our first build out of this program. In terms of savings and folks, if you're not part of the UCC Protect program, these are still questions you should ask your existing broker or your existing insurer if you're looking for ways to save money. Taking the deductible up from a low number all the way, say, to 10,000 can potentially save you 15% of premium. Again, risk reward trade-offs and stuff, but while we're scratching and clawing to save money, that could be important. Evaluation, again, there's a 10% saving if you reduce the stated amount of coverage because you would rebuild way smaller. Deleting organ or stained glass. So many of us have that coverage. My own church does. But it's hard to believe that we would rebuild an organ again if there was a total loss. So again, these are the kinds of things that you could choose, but you need to make very sure that everybody, that people know. It's not the treasurer trying to save a buck. Liability coverage, while we recommend having 5 or 10 million, 2 million is the more or less table stakes bare minimum, and you could save a good chunk of change by just going with that. And again, there's some savings on the crime side as well. So more to come on that, but and we have more or less, I think, now caught up or very close to in terms of the service challenges and having the new team in place. So I expect there'll be a webinar in May or at the latest early June for the existing customers and a streamlined new business process for potential new customers.
And the first question then is who's your focused audience for that? Is that treasurers, trustees? How are you going to advertise it? Who should come?
We'll certainly, again, we don't have a database of trustee names. So when we communicate, we do have who the insurance contacts are for the policy, and whoever that is on the database with Hub, that's who that's the first set that we'll reach out to. We'll also, for duplication, intentional duplication, we will let all treasurers know that this is going on, and if you're a Hub client, maybe alert your trustee or if there are other people involved.
Sounds good. David says we have solar panels on the roof and the associated wiring. Should we let UCC Protect know?
The standard rule for insurance is yes, you should declare stuff. And just letting them know, it typically won't increase your premium. But declaring it is that puts the monkey on basically the insurance company's back. And right now that's even us. Mm-hmm. But yes is the answer.
Okay. You said something about you would help churches that were up to standard get cyber insurance if they wanted it. Do we now have a policy we can offer to congregations?
Again, Hub are the broker we use as a third-party administrator. Remember that the church is now participating in property and liability risks, but Hub can underwrite that on behalf of clients, as could a local broker if you have that preference.
Okay. The other questions I think are technical, or they've already been answered in the chat. So I'm gonna move along now, if you please.
Okay. I think I wonder if Dave Jagger's around.
Dave is here, and he's here at my invitation tonight because we had such a strong reaction, Dave, to the kinds of things you told us last month about increasing the revenue side of the balance sheet. So people were delighted to hear you and delighted to hear what you have to say and wanted to hear a little more. So welcome back.
Thanks. It's good to be here. Some of you may not have been here last month. I'm Dave Jagger. I'm the community-based stewardship lead with the philanthropy unit. Here to remind you that reducing expenses does not, in fact, increase revenues. And in fact, often drives them down as congregations talk only about meeting the budget. So as long as we can just reduce the budget, everybody can give less and we're all happy and we don't have to talk about money and, you know, can Jesus be far away? This will be great. Doesn't work that way. Actually, it does work that way, but it just means you get lower and lower and lower and further into trouble. So I'm here to let you know that there are alternatives to that approach. We have a number of courses. Steve, last month we were able to pull up that ChurchX page so people can see the registration. Can we still do
Give me
that?
just a second. I'll go and find it for you.
That'd be great. One of the, I guess the message I want to give you tonight is two parts. First of all, we have courses and we have experts who can help you to increase stewardship. So you're not on your own and you don't have to make all this up from scratch. We're here to help you and we want to make you look good. What Steve's going to bring up in a second, we'll talk about. But the other thing I want you to hear tonight is that stewardship is not the same as fundraising. They're very different things. Okay? Fundraising, lots of work. Stewardship, lots of work. Fundraising can increase income. Stewardship can increase income. This is sound a lot alike, but this is where it gets different. Fundraising tends to be a one-off. We have a dinner, we have a sale, and that brings in whatever it brings in, and it's done. Stewardship works towards sustainability because it happens all the time. Fundraising is usually about meeting budgets and maintaining the status quo, whereas stewardship grows faith, and then in turn, that grows ministry. So it's long-term, and it will keep things going for much longer than a new bake sale or another dinner will, often with less work. So those two are very different things, and that's one of the core pieces to the Getting Started in Stewardship program, which is our entry point into Called to Be the Church, the Journey. Now, that doesn't mean you don't do the course now because Dave told you the secret sauce, but please, we have another Getting Started course that is running on the 11th of June. There are two options for it. One is from 4 till 5:30 Eastern time, and the other is from 6:30 to 8 o'clock Eastern time. So that's earlier in the day for the folks to the west and later in the day for the folks to the east. But it kind of works for everybody. So I would encourage you strongly, either yourself or find somebody in the congregation. If you have a stewardship committee already, great, send them. If you don't have a committee already, that's okay. You don't need one to do this course. One person can come on their own if they want. But come to Getting Started. There's no cost to that. It's a freebie. It's 1 hour. Well, it's an hour and a half. It's an hour of content and then time for questions and answers afterwards. And its whole purpose is to get you started in stewardship and to get things set up so you're ready to go on then and do some of the other modules like the stewardship best practices module. Now, the next one of that will not be until the fall, so that's okay. Gives you time to get ready for it because you need a team in order to start that one. Probably this fall, that's going to be about an 8-week course with class time for everybody and also cohort time with my team. I have a team of 4 people who are spread out across the country and they're set up regionally or in regional clusters at least. They're happy to help you and hear from you as well. But they're the coaches for all these different courses and they help lead them and make them happen. Roger James looks after Eastern Ontario right to the Atlantic Ocean, but he lives in Newfoundland. Brenna Baker, who looks after Southwestern Ontario, Antler River, Western Ontario, Horseshoe Falls regions. Melody Duncanson Hales, who looks after Canadian Shield, the rest of Ontario up north, and then the central stripe that runs down through and includes Toronto. And Vicki Nelson, who looks after Manitoba to the Pacific. So they're happy to talk with you, and you can find out how to get a hold of them by looking at the United Church /stewardship webpage as well, or you can talk to me and I'll connect you with them as well. So Getting Started is where you start. Stewardship best practices, or you could look at, if your congregation wants to set up a planned giving program, to look at bequests and estate giving. That course just started today, but there will be another one in the fall, and we're working on setting up an on-demand course. So you can do it anytime you want to. And there'll still be some support for you along the way. I hope that's going to launch in June. So keep an eye on this page to see that. And then there's also the setting up your giving program course. If you're planning to do a giving program in the fall, then you should get into this course now, because it'll help you to get set up and get things ready to go for that. Again, it's best if you come to that one with a team, because you're going to need a team. A team can be 3 people. You're going to need a team to do a good giving program anyways, but information on them, you can find them at the ChurchX page. Steve, maybe you can put the link to that in the chat as well.
Sure.
People can find it and go look at it in the details. So, yeah, we got energy and it's cool to see what happens. Lots of congregations have been involved in these modules, and lots of congregations have seen definite improvements, not just in their finances, in their morale, in the attitude around the congregation. Congregations have started to like each other again, and that, if nothing else, is a miracle in some places. So we're quite happy with how this program works, and we'd love you to be part of it.
And I need to say, as a minister in a congregation, things change in my congregation when there's a team working at it. It's almost impossible to get enough traction if there's only one person who cares. But
Great.
you send a team and they get excited, things happen. It's remarkable how it changes, and it's made a big difference in my church.
And Paul, you're right. Thanking is one of those pieces in the other secret sauce that you'll learn about along the way.
Okay.
Yep.
Dave, thank you. And we'll turn things back over to Eric.
So I hope to see you all signing up. I'll watch.
Eric, you're muted.
Okay, folks, I appreciate we've gone a little longer than usual, so I'm going to be fairly quick on these. A key one though, the May webinar, which the date's escaping me, but it's probably May 20 something, just after
May 22.
the
Fourth Wednesday of May is the 22th, because the first is a Wednesday.
Yeah. So folks, just to say that we want to use that session, as I mentioned earlier, for a broader finance person consultation around ministry compensation, and with a focus on the balance that we all have to work with around adequacy and wanting to treat our ministers as well as we can, and recognize contributions and performance and so on, combining that with sustainability and adequacy and so on. So this slide lists the various elements that are to be considered: sustainability, the indexing that has been in place for many years, geographic considerations, remote versus urban, all kinds of equity considerations as well. This study is underway, and the task group that's charged with delivering some recommendations quite quickly when it comes compared, in church time, I think literally this year, they'd love to hear from you, and I'm hoping as many of you as possible, and many others will join in here to provide input. I'm going to skip questions on that and just say, for any newbies out there, just listing a few of these things. The CRA, we had a couple of questions on that before. This is how to get online, but we also have a help desk when you're stuck, when they won't talk to you because you're not on the official list. Church Hub, the same thing. You've got to make sure that not only that you're on Church Hub if you're the treasurer, but that you make sure there's continuity when that role changes. The assessment invoices online, just to say two things. You should all have seen that information, and it's available as soon as you submit your statistics. So we really encourage people, when it comes to assessment, to pay online if at all possible, potentially even pre-authorizing something. And we have a new snail mail address, which is a lockbox arrangement, which is much more faster and more efficient, and electronic, which are all the kinds of things that we have to do these days to try to keep administrative costs as low as possible. The annual statistics, the deadlines are passed, but just a reminder to get those in if you haven't already. As soon as you do, and as soon as the numbers are processed, you'll already know what your 2025 assessment is. That's one of the benefits of doing the work. And Susan Jackson, who reviews every one of those submissions, reports that almost 60% of folks have filed now, and of those, she's reviewed what's that of sounds like 2/3 or something. In any case, do this for the assessment, but also because these, however difficult the statistics are to compile, and believe me, I know how difficult they are to compile and how many people you have to talk to and all that, but they are the best indicator of how things are going on an aggregate basis. And the finance team, the national team uses to set priorities, to try to inform all kinds of decisions. So really important to get those statistics in. We are better than most denominations in North America. I think we've had like 90% plus participation rates, and I'd really encourage you to help keep that going. And Susan has included a personal thanks too, as we seem to be getting the message out around statistics, and the quality of information keeps improving. So thank you for that. And thank you for Susan for just sweating the details day in and day out on this to help us all have the best information possible. So I include a slide here. We're not going to talk about it, but how to find your assessment information online. Again, if there's any newbies, you contact us for information. This is a standard repeat slide. Thought you might enjoy this. This is used to be on my first webinars in 2010 and 2011. The photo is from 2008. So I just want to warn you that this is what can happen if you're a treasurer for a church too long. So try to have a succession plan in place so it doesn't happen to you. Follow-up questions as always. There's the list, and thank you very much, everybody.
Well, thank you, Eric. I don't think you've changed a bit, except you shaved off the mustache. So
I've also put on a few, but are there any final questions before we wrap up?
There are no questions here. There's as often there are lots of appreciation in the chat. Somebody's asking about phone numbers. I would say check out the contact information at the ChurchX page. The slides from tonight's webinar are already posted at the ChurchX page. The recording is there and available to you too. So we'll look forward to connecting with you, and if you need to, reach out to us. But you should be able to find a lot of that information there at the ChurchX page.
I saw a request for a phone number, I think from Kelly. Susan Jackson, sjackson@united-church.ca will get you squared away.
So I remind you once again that we will gather next month on the 22nd of May. And please reach out to the folks in your congregation who would like to have a say in this conversation about ministerial compensation. And share it with your neighboring churches too. We're trying to gather as much of a critical mass as we possibly can for this consultation. It's important as we struggle with congregational budgets and minister standard of living and all of the different factors that go into looking at an appropriate salary level. There was a question that came into our Q&A forum this afternoon about, are there guidelines yet, for salary guidelines for 2025? The answer is not yet, but this compensation study is going to be a part of how those are set. So come and have your say. We need your input. In the meantime, we have run over time. I apologize for that, but I think it was important and valuable information and lots of questions. So we'll say good night and wish you well and see you in May. Bye for now.
Thanks, everybody.
And let me just take the leaders off into the breakout room again, as we usually do.